do? We offer entrepreneurship springboard programs to locate, educate, and facilitate bottom-up enterprising. We hold annual conferences to raise consciousness on development issues. We are also engaged in several critical initiatives, including Model Village, Rural Innovation Center Enterprise, Leadership Development, and TBP Digital to connect school students from privileged and underprivileged regions of the world. How do we do it? Our approach is very simple. We listen to you to identify issues, and then we marshal our humble resources to provide solutions at the grassroots level. Our strong conviction and belief that by transcending the constraints of self-interest and limits of national borders, by providing outstanding leadership in channeling intellectual know-how and financial resources, and by focusing on uncovering the inner power within people at the grassroots, we will be able to create a virtuous, progressive, and a more equitable and sustainable society. I strongly encourage you all to visit our website called thebostonpledge.org. Now it is my pleasure to introduce the brainchild and the chairman of the Boston Pledge, Mr. Partha S Ghosh.
Well, I'd just like to welcome everyone and basically launch the session today in name of Education Springboard Program and pass it on to our anchor, which is Mr. Devendar Singh. So Devendar, to you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ghosh. So with folded hands and my deepest reverence, I welcome you all and express my gratitude to the chairman, Dr. Partha Ghosh, President, Dr. Jahangir Sultan, co-practice leader, Dr. Madhusudan Chakravarti, and all the members of the Boston Pledge. And of course, the educators joining from different parts of the world for the support, love, and opportunity. It is indeed a privilege for me to serve you all as the anchor of this power of proving is one of the most fundamental force of life. This subject is deep. Its application is widely spread across everything known and unknown to human beings. I understand covering the depth and width of this subject cannot be done in 70 minutes. But the beauty of TBP EdSP is that we are humbled to have the association and presence of the best brains from all over the world. And the objective is to intrigue the collective conscience of global intellectual diaspora. In this session, to deliver justice to this topic and share practical application of power of probing, we are extremely delighted to have Dr. Sanjeev Chopra and Dr. N Ramesh. Dr. Chopra is a seasoned administrator, senior bureaucrat. His current role is crucial for the welfare of 1.3 billion people. As director of the apex body in India, which trains the administrators who are entrusted with the job to ensure well-being of people of most diverse country and the largest democracy. Dr. Chopra's presentation theme is questioning to awaken and transform lives around. How does power of probing help you train champions of change, enabling them handle responsibilities of lives around? Now, I'm happy to introduce Dr. N Ramesh, Director General of Police PMR, West Bengal. We know law, if not implemented well, it loses its essence. To keep 100 million people of West Bengal safe and secure in a democratic setup, police manuals and regulations play a key role. That is the major focus area of Dr. Ramesh, and his theme of presentation is the quest is at once a request and a conquest. Probably the urge of questioning is a request to know the unknown, and once the unknown becomes known, the feeling of joy fills the soul. And this is how power of probing propels life through uncertainties of future. Now, to begin this session, I have prepared few slides that I would love to share with you all. And the theme of this presentation is absolutely beautiful in certain ways. And at the same time, I would like to mention these are the thoughts that my little understanding could grasp. So now let us see few of the slides. Power of probing, that means asking questions. Now, if I have to talk about what is power of probing, I would answer harnessing the possibilities resulting from asking questions.
Devendar, your slides are not visible.
Not visible?
No.
I see. Okay. I will just check it once.
Share the.
You need to share it.
Do the green button, the bottom.
Yes, I did that. Share the computer sound device. Okay.
Otherwise, just go ahead and speak.
Is it visible now?
No.
Okay.
Just go ahead. Yeah.
Sure. So kindly allow me 10 seconds. I'll just try to.
Yeah, you have a cold as we are waiting.
I hope now these slides are visible.
No, it's not. Why don't you go ahead? Just speak to the slides. We'll understand.
Sure. Okay. Well, okay. So the questions, the tools to mine the mind space, this is the theme of my presentation, where the first thing is we need to understand what is mind space. And mind space is the minus infinity, or the universe within, where mobilization of thoughts take place to influence mobilization of matter and thought, in plus infinity, or the external universe. Okay. So by this, I mean to say that life, which comes somewhere between the minus infinity and positive infinity, is invoked by questions to propel through the journey of the life. And I think without the diagrams, it will be a bit difficult for me to relate. So if I may share this presentation over email with Dr. Ghosh or Yang, will it be okay for you to share it?
Yeah, but it will take too much time away though. If we just go through and we can do it at the end. By that time, we can email it so that we can pass it on to Mr. Chopra and Dr. Ramesh.
Sure, sure. Okay. So if we have to visualize the inner universe as the negative infinity or the minus infinity, where if we drop a question, it invokes or activates the process to mind the mind space, which mobilizes thoughts, unleashing intuitive power using the limbic system, that is the emotion and memory component of the brain, which further minds and brings the fact files. The fact files are the entities, behaviors, properties, nature, relationships of various instances that mind has captured so far. And once this processing happens, then executable instruction sets get ready. That is, stacks get ready as per the priority, which then engages the faculties, bringing actions in positive infinity. That is the external life. Now the question is, what propels these questions? What propels the doping of question? If we have to consider it as doping as we do in semiconductor devices, the urge to know is the energy, greater the affinity, greater the potential difference. This potential difference or this energy must come from the educators to encourage questioning. And this is what we are trying to do here in EDSP. The learned people all around the world, they're coming together and building an ecosystem, promoting a culture to ask questions so that we can move ahead. When we mine the mind space, we uncover the potential, the hidden potential within. And this is exactly what the Boston Pledge is trying to do. And this is what would propel inventions, would make discoveries happen, solutions, arbitrations, dissolving of all the deadlocks. So by questioning, we experience richness of inner universe. We have often heard that thoughts leads to words, words lead to action, actions lead to habit, and habit leads to nature. So in this negative or in this minus infinity, which is within, that is the mind space, thoughts breed, thoughts germinate, and these thoughts trigger every actions that we see in the external universe. I would say questioning is the audacity to measure the extremes of infinity. Now, we all know that questions change the world. We have often heard about Newton and the Apple story that led to this law of gravity. We have also heard about the why the kettle lid was blown away, which led to the steam engines. So thousands and millions of questions has actually brought the human civilization where we are today. So every invention that changed the world happened on the basis of questions, whether we name it as wheel, compass, automobile, steam engine, concrete, petroleum, anything and everything. Now, the powerful questions are proactive. They spark creative thinking. This leads to new ideas, and new ideas in turn lead to innovations. I would rather put it this way, that a question is used to trigger a conversation with self and others based on the purpose of conversation to make sense of something, especially a complex issue, to obtain different points of view or gain consensus. By the way, building consensus is one of the most crucial art for success to happen. And this is what the world needs. To flourish as a human civilization, we need to ask questions to ourselves so that we can build consensus. To generate ideas, surface, and imagine possibilities, to connect with other people, to build relationships, to solve problems or figure out how best to respond to them, to reveal hidden issues or unintended consequences of our action. Above all, to make any decision, we need to ask questions. And the basis of powerful question is something that will help us frame the questions that would solve problems. What is the context? Why are you doing this? What is it that hope to achieve? What outcomes would you like to see? What is in it for all the participants? When I say about all the participants, I'm talking about all the entities. In case it is people getting involved, it's about the people. Else, if it is material or if we are engaging with the intangible or the inanimate stuff, so we need to understand the properties, the nature of that. And it's the question which leads to a better understanding of the properties. Now, one question that I want to leave you with is, am I giving enough than I take? And with this, I hand over the stage to Dr. Chopra to take it forward. Thank you very much.
All right. I hope I'm audible. Should I move on?
Yes, please. Yes, please. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Dr. Partha Ghosh, Dr. Sultan, Dr. Chakravarti, my good friend, Dr. Ramesh, and of course, Devendar, and all of us who joined this wonderful program today. You see, the setting of the context has been done by Devendar, and he's also mentioned to you that we'll be talking about how questions change the world and how it's important to ask seminal questions. And he mentioned that how a lot of inventions that we today consider as normal, today we consider, to be absolutely, the world around us is full of these inventions. But we'll focus on institutions, and we'll focus on how when individuals have questioned the world around them, questioned the status quo around them, and questioned the dominant discourse, that is what leads to change. And I'll talk about two very powerful individuals who changed the course of history and brought about their thoughts in entirely different contexts. I'll talk to you about Mahatma Gandhi, and I'll talk to you about Guru Gobind Singh. You see, Mahatma Gandhi saw the world around him, and at a point of time when there was no one to question the power of the Western model of industrial growth and society, when the dominant opinion in India was about the dominant status, he said, let's talk about the Hind Swaraj. And what was the Hind Swaraj talking about? The Hind Swaraj was talking about taking control of the world around you. It was about taking control of resources around you. And it was rejecting a dominant discourse at that point of time. And I think rejecting the dominant discourse, rejecting the discourse that you have to be powerful in order to succeed. And when he meant the word powerful, I mean, the world looked at power in terms of guns, in terms of ammunition, in terms of physical force. But the Mahatma rejected that entire notion, and he brought into light an entirely new way of looking at things. And as he said, I mean, where lies greater courage in shattering others to pieces by a cannon, or with a smiling face the cannon, and be, destroyed. So I think he brought into focus an entirely different way of looking at things. Before him, the way in which we were looking at an independence movement was that, if the elite could get together every year at, and organize a congress, powerful, influential people, well-read barristers, well-known editors, and all these things, we'll be able to bring about some change in the way in the negotiating space. But I think Gandhiji changed that entire paradigm, and he changed the entire paradigm, and he brought the entire movement into a certain focus, and he took up things like salt, he took up things like khadi, he took up things like nationalist education. So these were things which had not been thought before, and it was actually, for the Britishers, it was a black swan event, because the Britishers could not have thought that salt satyagraha would lead to such phenomenal change in society and would create an empowerment. And I'm sure that the bureaucrats at that time and the LGs at that time wouldn't have understood. They could have thought of revolutionary movements because they had a way to deal with revolutionary movements. And it was actually, the salt satyagraha was actually a black swan event insofar as the British were concerned. Now, we know about Hind Swaraj and all these things. I want to now, and the other thing is that Mahatma Gandhi was using, was looking at a solution which he felt would involve a lot of people. And he therefore said that, all right, I will challenge you on your might, on my terms. I challenge your might, but on my terms. And that is how new institutions come into being, whether it is new institutions in economics, whether it is new institutions in social sciences. So this is a very powerful way of questioning the world around you and questioning the dominant discourse around you. So it is not a question of looking at GDP growth. It's a question of questioning whether GDP is the way to examine growth, whether there are other ways also of looking at growth, because as we've seen that, you could have the same sort of GDP, but the way you look at GDP, the way you look at social indicators is one thing. Now, let me take you back to 1705, when Guru Gobind Singh, we were living in a fairly, were living, and hopefully we are out of it, but we were living in a society where the dominant markers were caste and religion. And because the dominant markers were caste and religion, it was indeed, very difficult to put up a challenge to the empire of Aurangzeb. When Guru Gobind Singh found that it is not possible for him to have challenged it, in the normal sense, then he wrote his very famous epistle of victory called the Zafarnama, which was a call to everybody in this country to break the barriers, emerge as the Khalsa. And then you see, he made the point, very important point, that when all means when you don't have the means to change, then take up the arms, take up the sword. Now, this also means that all things that we look at, all our questioning is also in the nature of a context. So everything that we do around us also is to change the context. So what we do is what Guru Gobind Singh did in the creation of the Khalsa, and what Mahatma Gandhi did in getting ahimsa into the land. And I'm very conscious that I'm using two examples from our own country to showcase and to show to you how one chose ahimsa and one chose the power of the sword, right? Because the context was different. But what they were doing is that they were questioning the contemporary world around them, and they were responding to that world in terms of a new way of looking at things. And the institutions which they were able to create were institutions which have had a long-lasting impact. And this impact was not just physical. This was an impact on the mind. The mind space which Devendar keeps talking about. So it is not the physical aspect. It is the aspect of the mind. And I think that is where all of us need to question the world around us. We need to question what is given. We need to question why is this the only way to look at it. Let me give you some small examples. You see, when we talk about health systems today, we're only talking about the conventional allopathic health system. We are thinking that it's only the vaccine which will get us out of COVID. Have we looked at our traditional systems of medicine? Whether it's the Tibetan system of healing, or it's the Indian system of healing, or it could be other systems of healing. We have got so used to, our minds have been so conditioned to accept whatever the multilaterals, whatever the World Bank and the WHO and the ILO tell us. So we accept that. So it is this exactly that we have to question. That is this paradigm of thought, is this paradigm of development the only way to look at development? Is this the only way we will react to circumstances? And I think once we start accepting that there are many ways of looking at the world, there are many ways of challenging the existing status quo, all of us would have multiple options and multiple solutions, because one thing is very clear, that each one of the 8 billion people in the world is unique. All of us are unique. All of us have unique situations, and all of us must question and must probe the world around us, and we must have 8 billion solutions, 8 billion answers to the problems around us, and no one solution will fit the other person, because the beauty of this world is that everyone is unique. What dominant individuals like Mahatma Gandhi, Guru Gobind Singh, Einstein, Newton, and now what all of you are doing in the Boston pledges, to create that nudge, to create that essential element that all of us can do it. And I think that's a very empowering experience. And that is the power of questioning. That is the power of probing. And it is this power of probe that all of us must cultivate. And all of us must tell everybody around that question the world around you, and you will find the answers. No one can give an answer to anyone else. So we have to ask the right questions. We have to encourage the asking of questions, because what I remember out of a 1-year fellowship period at Cornell, at the Dean's dinner, they said, we can teach you nothing at Cornell. If at the end of a year, you ask a few good questions, we think it would have been abundant recompense. And this is how I would like to end my opening thoughts today. Thank you very much, Dr. Ghosh.
Thank you very much, Dr. Chopra. Now, may I request Dr. Ramesh to take over the dais, please. Thank you. You are muted.
Am I audible? Am I audible, sir?
You are audible.
Okay. It's indeed a great honor to greet my fellow Bengalis like Dr. Partha Ghosh, who is also from IIT Kharagpur. My another fellow Bengali like Dr. Chakravarti, who is also one of my respected earlier gurus. And Dr. J. Sultan, who is almost like my brother, who shares the Asiatic identity. So is my sister, Logik, from Quantum Logic Consulting, my brother, Devendar Singh, and my guru, Dr. Chopra, and my senior, most respected senior of our cadre, one of the most highly respected IAS officers to the country, Dr. Chopra. আমি সবাইকে প্রথম আমার আন্তর্জাতিক দুর্গাপূজার শুভেচ্ছা জানাই। And আজকে গঙ্গার নদীর তীরে বসে দুর্গাষ্টমীর মহাপবিত্র দিনে আপনাদের সবাইকে আমার আন্তরিক শুভেচ্ছা জানাই। And to be on the living on the banks of River Ganges, I'm speaking from Barakpur, which is the starting point of the first war of Indian independence. Since I'm a policeman and I'm also having done some 3 PhDs, both in technology, in law, as well as in national security, and also having run many marathons and participated in encounters, killed 15 hardcore terrorists in operation. With this experience, I understood asking the right questions and the right forum in the right time is the beginning of solving our problems. The real freedom lies in knowing the timing of understanding the problem, that is the real diagnosis, and translating the diagnosis as a quest for answer through courage and ability to ask the right questions. And before that, you require to have a frame of mind to understand the persons who are supposed to answer your questions. sometimes silence and a staring look into the eyes of a tormentor is the best question in demanding the answer through my silent suffering. That's what the greatest apostle of peace in the current century, Nelson Mandela, has taught us. We all know Nelson Mandela. Mahatma Gandhi, national figure. Mahatma Gandhi is like a god. I don't have the ability, or neither I have the status to discuss the great father of the nation. But since I belong to that era of Nelson Mandela, having been in a 6 by 4 inch room, 6 by 4 feet room for 27 years and surviving the apartheid regime in asking the right question, his survival was the question. That's why I just wanted to frame up my little bit of my sharing of the thought or presentation as request. A quest is a request as a conquest at the same time. Request because unless the person whom I'm asking the questions cooperate with me, I will not get the answers. In other words, the link between a question and answer is required to be in an empathetic environment, and that empathy should be there to promote knowledge. If there is no empathy, if there is no level playing field, if the question and the answer are related not by accountability but by authority or authoritarianism, then the question will be a demand, the answer will be a crumb or supply, and supply and demand always belong to the market and not to freedom. So freedom is the essential thing that links the question with the answer. If freedom is respected both by the questioner and the person who are answering, so it becomes both a request and a conquest. A conquest, or in the sense, it becomes a conquest because you are conquering an unknown, a dangerous arena to remove the fear of the unknown. A conquest is the one that converts the fear of the unknown into the freedom of the known. And that's where the request and the conquest conjoins themselves to convert into the growth of the field of knowledge and converting the field of knowledge into wisdom. I belong to a country which has got Sanskrit as its language, and the Sanskrit is also the Sanskriti because it has got 56 words from A to Cha. That's why we call it Achara, A to Cha, the 50 words. The 50 words also means the word which comes from the Vishuddhi Chakra, that is Kantashwar, is also the sound that creates the system. The Sari, Gama, Padani, the 7 steps. I invented one more step, 7 steps, Paramapada Sopan, I call it, as the following. And that is, in fact, had I have some time, I would have made some small presentation, but be that is as it may. The 7 steps are like this. The first step is the data. The second step is the knowledge. The third step is the wisdom that comes out of it. The fourth step is the SOP, standard operating procedure. The fifth step is the ideology that comes out of it. The sixth step is religion. The seventh step is, of course, the cosmos. In other words, when I generate data through my question is basically a data field. If it is answered, the knowledge is generated. If filtered knowledge is there, it becomes wisdom. If I apply that wisdom into a process, if I convert that wisdom into a process, it becomes a standard operating procedure. And the standard operating procedure is adopted by many, it becomes an ideology. If the ideology is usurped by a generation, it becomes a religion. Christianity, Marxism, Islam, Buddhism were all ideas. So idea, that first step is the idea, then data, and then the knowledge, and then the wisdom, and then the SOP, and then the religion, and then the ideology, and then ideology and then religion. So this is the 7th step. The quest is there, which connects all these steps from one to one. David Easton speaks about the system analysis, wherein he says about the most important thing of a system is the inputs and the outputs and the feedback mechanism. The question has to be there not only in the diagnosis, in the feedback mechanism, and also in checking the quality of the output, so that the output really is linked to the input. If it is not linked to the input, it becomes an authoritative, unaccountable throwing up or fraud that we often see in North Korea or in many other countries, wherein in the name of many ideologies, normally the misgovernance or malgovernance is an answer to people's genuine issues. Now, coming to the relation, the practical aspects of the quest. A teacher and a student, I call it as, I like L&T brand, Larsen and Toubro, because L means learner and T means teaching. I'm a constant learner, and I also gave myself a small slogan. I wrote many such slogans. One such slogan is, a bad student can never become a good teacher. A bad soldier can never become a good general. A bad child, a bad son can never become a good father. Because without the quality of the good seed, there cannot be a good deed. The quality of the rightfulness or the virtue of a quest is there in the question itself. And then only it will lead to a good answer. So the questioner must always have this kind right spirit in answering. Mahatma Gandhi, when he questioned the mighty British Empire, had that. Let me come to other great examples. My great respected senior, Dr. Chopra Sahab, has questioned two great historical figures. I respect both of them. Let me also come out a few more. In my country, India, Bharat. I call my country as Bharat. In Bharat, we have C cube. The first C is Chanakya. The second C is Chhatrapati. The third C is Chandrasekhar Azad. These three C's personify three different quests, three different places. The first C, Chanakya, questioned Mahapadmananda's indulgence in not respecting the Alexander's invasion to India. And he threw out and he brought another C called Chandragupta Maurya. So here is the question, here is the answer. So the right questions, when unanswered, will change the regimes. So those of us who are at the helm of affairs must always shiver at the courage of the person who asks the right question, because the question starts as a request, and if you fail to answer the request, it will become conquest, which may unseat us from our comfort zones to hell. So this is what Chandragupta Maurya's history shows. So is Chhatrapati. Chhatrapati Shivaji also posed a question of independence and autonomy. It was promised, and a fraudulent called Aurangzeb tried all the tricks, and so Chhatrapati came with the guerrilla warfare, the best guerrilla warrior in the world, Chhatrapati Shivaji. And he answered, he also established a regime. And then we have Chandrasekhar Azad, who started the Hindustan Republic Army, so Hindustan Republic Association. And he brought in great people, great nationalists, great patriots like Bhagat Singh, Ashfaqullah Khan, so many. Yesterday, only day for yesterday, we celebrated the birthday of Ashfaqullah Khan. So here is the persons who gave out with the right course, because they had the empathy with the people. Those questions which people ask, which individuals ask, those questions become institutions, because the person who is asking the question is not a person, is a mass, is an accumulated question of the accumulated persons and accumulated problems. And that's why it becomes an institutionalized question. And when the institutionalized questions are not answered properly, then history will take a different, sometimes difficult course, which we have seen, which we are seeing different parts of the country, in different parts of my country and different parts of the world. Let me conclude. Today, we are able to share our thoughts nicely in Zoom. These are the questions which were put by the technologists and they answered. Today, I could speak to all of us in sitting in my comfort zone of my home and sharing with my great friends, the professors in Boston. Boston is a great place. I visited Boston when I last time visited USA, and I went to MIT. These are the greatest places which encourage the freedom, encourage the independence, freedom that leads to independence of action, freedom of thought must always contribute to independence of action, and hence is the right quest that converts the freedom into independence. Today, Zoom gave us that independence. Today, this technology gave us the independence. There is one Apple which created a Newton. There is one more Apple which was created by Steve Jobs, which is making the world as a level playing field, from global to local, from local to global. Amazon is a great river. So is an Amazon as a company. Today, when my country passed the farm reform bills in the country, I will be seeing a situation wherein my little poor farmer who is having only 1 acre of land will be directly negotiating with a Tata and a Birla to sell his organic farm. That is the independence that the technology has brought. And we in this country are open. Let 1,000 flowers of bloom, let 1,000 schools of thought open. So, with one Sarvatra Pujyate, my country and my conscience and my people have always been open to ideas. My country, which gave the Vishwakavi Kavi Guru Rabindranath Tagore, who gave that great thinking, that great Gitanjali, who celebrates the bloom of wisdom. Jyoti se Jyot jagate chalo, pyar ki Ganga bahate chalo. This is what my country has given. Vishwaguru, Kavi Guru Rabindranath Tagore. So with this system, I am telling you, Microsoft, I admire Microsoft for its name. It is soft. It is also micro. Softness starts with micro things only. Micro to macro, macro to growth. And secondly, Microsoft speaks about windows, not doors. If you don't take my friends, if you don't take care of windows, you will be shown the door. That is the philosophy of Microsoft. So take care of the windows in a micro manner, softly, not the hard way, in order to secure your door. Otherwise, you will be shown the doors. This is the philosophy of Microsoft. So this is what I thought. And let me also, just last point I would like to say, I have given myself the formula, M cube, I cube, and E cube. M cube is my problem. I cube is my process. E cube is my solution. What is M cube? M cube is Maoism, Mujahideen, and Mafia. What is I cube? Idea, implementation, and I. It starts with me, not with anybody else. It starts with me. And what is EQ? EQ is excellence, education, and emancipation. Let me continue to be a student always and every time. I touch the feet of Dr. Sultan, Dr. Partha Ghosh, Dr. Chakravarti sir, and my great professor Jeremy sir, and all others. My friend Devendar, I should not touch his feet, but I will bless him. And I've always touched the feet of Dr. Chopra sir. Thank you. Jai Hind. Vande Mataram. Jai Chandrasekhar Azad.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Ramesh, for this powerful speech of yours. Now, let me request Dr. Ghosh to bring the best out of all the two speeches, or if I may consider my my little session as one of them. So may I humbly request Dr. Ghosh now to take over the dais, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thanks to everyone. I'm absolutely humble and touched. But before I have the privilege to bring everything together, I have my colleague, Dr. Brightman, on stage. I think he has come prepared to share his systems thinking, which I felt created what we have discussed today, that we have to connect the dots. So Jerry, if you're there, may you take the stage and share with us your thoughts based on what you have heard so far.
So Partha, I'm very angry at you. You have put me in the midst of such brilliant minds that I am humbled, that I hope you can even see my face on the screen, because my whole body begins to shrink in the fact that these ideas are so broad and so deep and so rich, going back to 1700 and Mahatma Gandhi. I will also have to brush up on my language skills so I can understand some of the things that you're saying. But I'm going to approach this a little bit differently than you folks, and maybe I'm glad I'm going last, because I think that I see some of the big differences between East and West, between your way of thinking and some of the ways that I think in my corporate work that I've done. So I want to begin by just saying that I'm biased toward the work of Dr. Peter Senge from MIT. Now, it's not really saying Senge's thoughts, because the book that he wrote in 1999, The Fifth Discipline, The Art and Practice of the Learning Organization, was not such an original work per se, but what he did was he synthesized a lot of the behavioral psychology and the way businesses work, going back to the mid-1950s, where systems thinking actually began with Jay Forrester at MIT and systems dynamics. So I had the pleasure of working with Peter for about 5 years. I look at him as a mentor, as well as my other colleagues at a company called Innovation Associates. So one of the first concepts that I learned in the company was the meaning of the word dialogue. And it comes from the Greek dia and logos. Dia meaning through, logos meaning meaning. And in the days of the Greek legislature, nobody left until the meaning of what was being discussed passed through everybody. Now, fast forward to 2020, at least as I understand it from my clients and my students here in the West, there's probably going to be 15 meetings in the course of a day. And if I ask anyone what did they remember from the first meeting at 8:30 this morning, they have no idea, because there was no time for the meeting to pass through them. They went on to the next. They must have looked at the Greeks as having an abundance of time to sit there for letting the meaning come into everyone. Here we just have meeting after meeting after meeting, and people don't even know what's happening. So I'm so interested in this topic of probing, and the word I use is inquiry. And the reason I use the word inquiry is I talk a lot about the need for balance between inquiry and advocacy. Inquiry meaning asking questions, advocacy meaning making statements. Now, when I ask my students and my clients if they can remember the last meeting that they were in, I would ask them how many questions were asked during that meeting versus statements that were made. I haven't done any scientific study, but I can tell you from what I know up here and in here, the average score is 95 to 97% advocacy, people stating their views. Maybe 2 or 3% are questions. And I'm amazed when I think of that, because everyone is just stating an opinion, a view, and how you could ever come to consensus with 97% advocacy is beyond me. So what I do at this point as an educator, and Partha probably knows this, I divide my class up into groups of 2s. And everyone has the number 1 and the number 2. And the number 1s, I say, okay, raise your hand. They all raise their hand. Number 2, raise your hand. They know who they are. So number 1, you begin the dialogue by saying something that you are passionate about. And number 2, all you can do is answer with a question. So I give an example. I love baseball, American baseball. It's not cricket, but I'll learn more about cricket later. So the conversation may go, person 1 says, I love baseball. And easy to number 2, the number 2 person says, why? And then I might say, well, my father loved it, my grandfather loved it. They would swear at the Boston team that was always so terrible many years ago. And then now the number 2 has a tougher time coming up with a question. So he says, well, how do you think the Boston Red Sox will do this year? Then I said, well, they're not going to do so well. They have a terrible team. Now he's really stuck for another question. And I sometimes do this exercise for 15 minutes. And the number 2 person is ready to rip out all the hair in their head and to commit suicide, because it's so hard to think of another question. But when I debrief this exercise, I would ask the number 2 person, so what did you learn when Jerry was talking about baseball? Their answer would be amazing. It would have nothing to do with baseball. They would say, Jerry's a wonderful guy. He's a family man. He's got 4 kids and even a dog. And I would say, wait a minute. We're not talking about Jerry and his dog and baseball and his family. We're talking about baseball. He says, yeah, but by asking all these questions, all these other things about his personality and his character and his love generated to the top. So my students begin to say, maybe there's something to asking questions. Maybe there's a value in asking questions. So I'd love to present to you two thoughts that originated actually from Dr. Chris Argyris at Harvard. The first is called the ladder of inference, and the second is called the left-hand column, and I'll explain both. So here's what I do in class. Again, Partha told me to share pedagogy, so here's what I do in class. I select one student and I go out of the room and I tell him what his role is. I say, you are going to be a movie star. I want you to be at one end of the room and I'll be at the other end of the room, and we will walk toward each other, and I will say, hello, boss, how are you? And you will continue to walk by without saying a word. Understood? So we come into the classroom. I say, okay, we're going to have a wonderful moment. Your classmate is about to win an Oscar for his acting performance. Go. And the person walks toward me and I walk toward the person. And as we're passing, I say to him, so how are you, boss? And the boss doesn't say anything and leaves the room. And then I turn to the class and ask, what happened? And the range of responses is amazing to me. One person will say, Jerry, your boss obviously is angry at you. He doesn't want to have anything to do with you. Jerry, he read the report you put on his desk last night and it was terrible. He's not going to speak to you. And they go on and on with all their answers. And then when they're over with their answers, I throw up some more answers. I say, what if he had just received a phone call that his daughter was in an automobile accident and he was rushing to the parking lot just to get his car to run to the hospital? Or maybe he just had Indian food for the first time and it was too hot for his stomach and he had to run for the bathroom. We don't know the answer, right? But out of a whole mass of potential data, every one of my students took one small point and went up the ladder of inference. They took one piece of data that fit with their reality. They selected that reality. They interpreted the reality. They made assumptions. The assumptions turned into beliefs and beliefs turned into action. And guess what? The time that it went from selecting that one small piece of data to making action was less than a nanosecond. It just zoomed up that ladder of inference. So what I teach to my students is very counterintuitive in today's complex and very busy business world. I tell them, now when you go up this ladder, I want you to do something different. I want you to select the data, but I want you to paraphrase the data to your colleagues. I want you to name what you think is happening. Explain and evaluate what's happening, decide what to do, and then have a double feedback loop to take action. And it's counterintuitive because this takes time, just like Partha mentioned about systems thinking. Systems thinking is not well adopted today in today's world where it's a beautiful leadership tool because it's counterintuitive because it takes time. Let me go on to the second part, which I love. It's called the left-hand column. And the left-hand column, what I do is I tell my students to take a piece of paper. On the very top, write 3 sentences about something that happened, and then divide the paper in half. We have a right-hand column and a left-hand column. And then I give them an example that I made up. This is not a true story, but it could be, right? It's about my daughter when she was learning how to drive. And here's how the dialogue actually went. You have to write it down as best you can remember. So now the situation that I write on the top of the page, it is now 2 o'clock in the morning. It is the 3rd time that my daughter has violated the curfew that we agreed upon. And I'm awake and she walks into the door. And here's the dialogue. She says to me, "Hi, Dad, I'm sorry to keep you up waiting for me." I say, "No problem. As long as you're home safely, that's the most important thing." She says, "Well, my date and I had a flat tire, which took a long time to fix." I say, "I certainly understand. It must have caused you a great bit of anxiety." She says, "Well, we got it fixed and here I am." And I say, okay, honey, sleep well. And she said, you too, Dad. Good night. I then asked my class, do you think that was the actual dialogue? And they all say, no, it wasn't. And they then tell me this should have been the actual dialogue. She walks up the stairs and she sees the light on and she sees that I'm up and she says, oh, damn, the old man is up. And I say to myself, you bet I'm up. And she says, well, maybe I'll try the excuse of the flat tire again. And I say to myself, she better not use the flat tire excuse. It ain't gonna work with me. And then she says, I'm grounded. And I say, you're grounded. And then I asked the class, does this sound more like the actual conversation? And they said, yes, 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 yes. And I say, no, the actual conversation was the first one that I gave. Why was it the first one? She violated the curfew for the third time in a row. I said, yes, it's true. But well, what were all the unexpressed thoughts and emotions? And this is the key to this left-hand column idea by Chris Argyris. We tend to hold back our true thoughts and our true emotions for fear that we may create conflict. I know that my mental model, my assumption was that if I had shown true anger in that moment, I would destroy the relationship with this beautiful 21-year-old woman that's my daughter. Now, when you think about that for a moment, Senge says all of our mental models or assumptions are inherently false or flawed. And our job as a good leader is not to make them perfect, but to make them less flawed. So if I had the time to think, I would say to myself, well, wait a minute. I've known this person since she was a baby. And she's now 21 years old. I have 21 years of knowledge about this woman. She's made a mistake. It's not the end of the world. It's not going to create great damage to our relationship. In fact, it may even benefit the relationship had I said what was in my left-hand column, which was, you really made a big mistake and you're going to get punished for it, because maybe it would have taught her a lesson. But no, I said, I'm glad you're home, have a nice sleep, and so forth. So remember these ideas as I say something else. You mentioned about shift of mind, the notion of the mind space. And I think that one of the greatest barriers to having the expression where inquiry will overcome advocacy is the mental models we have about ourselves, the world around us, and the people that we're talking to. And we have to sit back and maybe do some of the things that Mahatma Gandhi did, which is to truly listen, to really be mindful of the space that we're in. The first book that I recommend to all my classes now at Harvard is a book called The Miracle of Mindfulness by Thich Nhat Hanh, who was a Vietnamese monk who was once nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. And the beauty of that book is it sets the stage for the entire class to become a community of learners and leaders. And my classes at Harvard, they're usually 25 to 30 students from usually 12 to 18 different countries. So you would think with that diversity of thought, the diversity of culture, that everyone would be diffuse and different. But the spirit of mindfulness brings us all together, relaxes the people in the room, that over 7 weeks, I am very successful at creating a community of learners and leaders. So I have a lot more to say, and I'm happy to pass share a paper with Partha, but I want to give you one last view about this idea of inquiry versus advocacy. I don't think there's anything wrong with advocacy. In fact, I think it's very important for us to state our views on the world, but we should change that ladder of inference where we are able to paraphrase and put our own words into the data that we viewed. So when I go back to that example in the classroom, I could say, well, boss, I know you were upset with me. It must have been something I did. And the boss would turn to me and say, no, my daughter was in an automobile accident. I was so nervous about her health that I was rushing to the hospital. I was just looking for my car. I didn't want any time to spend with anybody. I was just zero focus on my daughter. And then I was, so it wasn't about me? Well, that's your thought. That's where you're coming from. But it was about my daughter and the situation we're in. So there's a wonderful word we used to use in Innovation Associates, Sengi's company, and the word was metanoia. It's a Greek word meaning shift of mind. And we have to find this balance between inquiry and advocacy. So I hope that when my class is over, my students at least go from 95% advocacy to maybe 70 or 80%, so that we can have more questions and we can learn more about the world. All the things that you said, Dr. Ramesh, Dr. Chopra, and others, that's beautiful. That's where we have to be. But first, it requires the leader to encourage a shift of mind, using mindfulness as a base to create this balance between inquiry and advocacy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Brightman. And we would love to hear you throughout the day. Thank you. Those were very powerful words. I really thank you from the bottom of my heart.
Thank you.
Now I hand over the stage to Dr. Ghosh. Thank you very much.
Okay, now it's my turn, and we have limited time. Jerry, thank you very much indeed. And thanks to Dr. Chopra, Dr. Ramesh, Devendar. I think you have definitely put together different kinds of thoughts, from something very philosophical, where we talked about the plus and minus universe, to talking about Mahatma Gandhi and Mr. Singh, and then we are talking to Dr. Ramesh from the banks of Barakpur, from the bank of Ganges, which is a very auspicious day today. So I think it's a very big challenge to connect all the dots. But as I took a lot of notes, I did take a lot of notes. And I think if for the audience, I see there are 5 takeaways, 5 key points to keep in mind, particularly in the context of educators, because we are talking about how we could cultivate everything that we have discussed in the minds of young people, be they 3 years old, or 20 years old, from kindergarten to universities. I think it's a continuous process that we have to cultivate in young minds. And there are 5 points that I would like to highlight. The first thing came actually from Devendar himself, where he talked about the universe, that there's a universe within and the universe outside. And most of our education has been focused to search the universe outside. That's for physics, chemistry, mathematics, biology, astronomy, astrology, and neurology. Everything is focused on understanding what we could see and touch or feel, but very limited time has been spent on the universe within. How do we understand ourselves better and deeper? Fortunately, some of the ancient education in India did talk about it, and some of the education in Greece also spent a lot of time understanding the mind. So perhaps that's the first point to take away, that within our education system, I'm glad that Dr. K.L. Chopra, who was director of IIT, but Dr. Chakraborty was the director of 2 IITs, and we have all kind of individuals across, and Dr. Brightman is teaching in 3 universities from Harvard to MIT to Tufts, that we have a responsibility. It's nice to share what we know, but we have a responsibility to practice in the education system. The first point, how do we cultivate the mind? So that's the first point that came to my mind as I learned from you. The second point which came to my mind is the word, Dr. Ramesh, you used it several times, the power of freedom. The free thinking, the freedom to connect, freedom to touch, freedom to experiment, freedom to look stupid, and most important, freedom to look stupid, and in the process, uncover the new. And that is also we have to cultivate when a child is very young. That, because we are all born free. There's a beautiful song, Born Free, if you remember, which goes back to the 60s, the Born Free. But I think we somehow, the education system limits the freedom. We keep drawing lines through what we teach, as opposed to removing the lines. else. So that is the second takeaway, that how do we cultivate the spirit of freedom in the minds of people, whether they are 3 years old or 25 years old. The third point which came out from Mr. Chopra's thinking, as well as all of you touched on it from different angles, is the whole point about courage. Because you develop the courage when you are free, when you do not feel you are being evaluated or being told this is right, this is wrong. You have the freedom, and the freedom leads to courage, and courage leads to the ability to question assumptions, question rules, question what we see, what we do not see, and in the process, open up new frontiers. So that's the third takeaway. And that leads to my fourth point, which I felt it was touched, but is very personal. It is reading between all the talks, between the lines, which I will use the word discipline of questioning. And I think that I took more from Jerry's point that, when we bring to play the systems thinking, our understanding of the micro with the macro, macro with the micro, that ability to be like James Bond. The reason I use the word James Bond is once you go to 10 Downing Street, within 5 minutes, you have to be able to impress the Prime Minister. And at the same time, in a bazaar in Istanbul, you should be able to lift the gun and play the battle. So that ability to move from the trenches to the boardroom, from the boardroom to the trenches, is something we have to develop. And I don't think we do a good job, because if I look at, particularly now I'm talking in the context of India, but it is true all over the world, but more so in India, as soon as people become senior, they feel it is not their responsibility to connect with the grassroots. I do not carry my bag, I do not do this, I do not do that. And in the process, we lose touch while we are developing the wisdom, because the wisdom has to be continuously enriched by staying in touch with the base issues, with the grassroots issues. So discipline of questioning has got three parts, which again, three of you touched on. One is how to dissect a complex problem. The complex problem which is given to you, which means it has been defined, and most of the problems which have been solved were undefined. It was something you searched, something you felt, is hypothetical. What Albert Einstein did with the general theory of relativity was not defined for him. It is his feeling led to the whole theory of relativity, or for that matter, we are talking about Newton. Apple has been dropping from the tree for millions of years, but only 500 years ago, someone saw it and thought about there may be a force. So I think that ability to dissect, and again, I'm thinking from the educator's point of view, how do we teach young minds how to dissect a problem? We in consulting, and particularly I'm very proud what Quantum Logic Consulting is doing. We are bringing this new capability into play, how to dissect so that we could develop understanding of the microscopic forces. And so I think that is very important. The second point is uncovering the truth. Uncovering the truth means that believing, which I think I learned in Japan, which we used to call the Ishikawa diagram. I don't know whether you guys are familiar. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the Ishikawa diagram, or the fishbone diagram, which is asking why to the fifth level, so we can get to the root. Getting to the root meaning getting to the truth. That what is the problem? And I think Dr. Chopra talked about it in the connection of the COVID-19, and there are many ways we can look at COVID-19. One is the Western way of attacking the virus, but there are other ways, the way Confucius thought about the problems in China, the way Japan thought about such problems in Japan, or the homeopathic thinking that developed in India, largely actually in Bengal. How do we look at such problems from multiple perspectives, which is through which we can read the truth? And the final point in the discipline of questioning is challenging the assumptions. We always work with certain assumptions, and it is typically comes down from the senior level to the level where the problem gets solved. But often we do not realize the assumptions are based on past habits. Some of them are right. Some of them may not be right or may not be appropriate in the new environment. So I think that ability to question assumptions is also very important. So as you could see, it is, I think I'm glad that we had the discussion, but the big takeaway is that we have to think of how we could convert, and I would ask Devendar to do that work after this session, to architect a curriculum, literally a curriculum, what could be taken to the children from 6 to 12, 12 to 18, then to the IITs, and fortunately we have got directors of IIT directly involved here, which we could take for students who are in universities. And also I will request Ing, who is connected with the corporate world, to take this thinking to the boardrooms of company. Because many of the reasons, we talked about Apple, we talked about Amazon, we talked about Newton, all in one go, thanks to Mr. Ramesh. But the point is, why do change come from small companies? IBM was huge. They spent billions of dollars on R&D, but Bill Gates and Steve Jobs changed the whole computing industry. Similarly, if you look at the social media, young Mark Zuckerberg changed the whole social media. So I think Ing, who kicked off the meeting today, my request to Quantum Logik Consulting, which is a new consulting firm with a tremendous ambition to change the world, is to help the CEOs, and maybe we can work with Mr. Chopra, who is working with the Indian Administrative Services, how to create this new mindset where people at the boardroom level would be able to ask the right kind of questions. People who are the top secretaries in Indian governance or China or Japan ask the right questions. And that's where I think we are repeatedly failing these days, that we are not being able to break out of the assumptions. So I think we have touched a lot on the fifth point was the ladder of inference. I think Jerry took it away from me if I had to add only one value to the whole thinking, but I didn't know, Jerry, that this has been discussed earlier, but I was thinking not a ladder of inference, ladder of search up and down so that we could continually think of new dimensions. So with that, I think I'd like to have a Q&A session, which will be led by Dr. Chakrabarty. And I know Dr. KL Chopra is also in here because both of you could together stimulate a discussion based on what we have covered so far. So once again, thank you very much on behalf of both Quantum Logik Consulting as well as the Boston Pledge that we could organize this thought process. But now the real thinking would begin as we create the ferment of questioning, comments, thoughts, and I pass it to Dr. Chakrabarty, who will also to give you a little bit of a view of why we are doing all this. Why do we spend Saturday morning in Boston thinking about all these crazy topics? And there's a reason the world needs a change, and we have to be part of that change. Again, quoting Mahatma Gandhi, as opposed to complaining what the world is not doing. With that, Dr. Chakrabarty, I pass it on to you.
Thank you, Partho. Am I audible?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Partho, for a wonderful summary of the entire presentations or discussions we had today. We have this educational springboard program under the Boston Pledge, and we are conducting these sessions. I think it's the fourth session today.
Sixth.
Six, okay. And then it is we are trying to reach out to the teaching community. We have been talking about reforms in the education. In fact, you all will agree that the education system that we have need reforms. And as Partho says, that we have to start, we have to have a new renaissance in education. There are a lot of discussions, there are many committees, there are many reports that are coming up for making reforms in education system. But we thought that we need to contribute to the reforms and make our contributions directly. And that can be done only when the teachers and the teaching community is involved. It doesn't matter how many reports you write, how many policies you make, nothing will work unless and until that we are able to empower the teachers to bring in changes in the education system. The job of a teacher is not only to pass on information or clear some doubts in the class. They have to work as mentors, they have to be the role models, and they have to blend their teaching on subjects with many other issues which are mostly skill-based. That is, power of probing is one of the skills that we have been talking about. Intuitive power, we had discussed earlier, or creative thinking, critical thinking. So the teacher has to work with students, make teaching a learning experience. When you bring about a subject in a class, you have to take the students along with you and learn together. And for that purpose, you can learn that can be education only when you know how to ask questions. So one of the great responsibility, important responsibility of a teacher is to encourage or instill a courage in every student to ask a question. One must not shy away from asking a question. What happens a lot of times, students think no, they may appear foolish in presence of others. Even then, the teachers have to ask the students or encourage them that they have to ask a question if they want to understand the subject, if they want to know about nature, or if they know about anything. Without asking questions, nothing can proceed. And second point, while encouraging them to ask questions and instilling a courage on the students to ask a question, teachers also have to teach them the appropriate time to ask a question. I think that's what Jeremy was telling us, when to ask a question. Or Partha, we have said about discipline of questioning. So we, on behalf of the Boston Place, we want to reach out to the teachers, and actually, as I keep on saying, that we must form a exclusive international club of educators, provide them a platform where they can exchange ideas with one another on the teaching and learning process. If we are able to do that, then I think we will be able to directly contribute to the reforms in the education system that we have been talking about. With this word, I think we should go for kind of a discussion or a question answer session now. The only question that was asked by, I think, Edith is, how do you balance, the question was addressed to Jerry, how do you balance between inquiry and advocacy? But I think Jerry tried to answer that question itself. But if Jerry wants to make more comments on that, let us welcome that. Jerry, please.
Yeah, I'm inspired again by what everyone has said. And Dr. Chakravarty, when you were just talking, a wonderful quote came to mind, and I was looking it up on my phone just to make sure I got it correct, by Albert Einstein. And this is how I began my 2 classes this summer at Harvard. Einstein quotes, and I wish I could have said this better, but you actually said it. But here's what Einstein said. He must be like your first cousin or something like this, because it was very similar. He said, the value of an education in the liberal arts college is not the learning of many facts, but the training of the mind to think something that cannot be learned from textbooks. Now, in that regard, you ask, how do you do it? And I agree that the onus is on the professor, the teacher and the professor, there are in systems thinking, we use the term structure influences behavior. And I started teaching after my business career at Tufts, and I was put into a program that already had a structure in place. And we divided it into 3 sections, and the 3 professors had to teach the same thing. And I liked the content that we had, but I didn't like the way it was taught, but I was put into a structure where I had to be like my other 2 teachers. Once I started teaching at Harvard, there was nobody kind of looking over my shoulder. And now we've changed to more online stuff at Tufts. No one's looking specifically over my shoulder. So I asked myself the question that you just posed, which was, how do we as teachers now change that structure? And I had a class in creativity and innovation at Harvard this summer. And after the second week out of the 7 weeks, I just intuitively felt, based on my experience, it wasn't going very well. And then I said to myself, my job as a teacher is to change this class, but not by myself, with all the students. So when we met for the start of the 3rd week, I said, you guys, we are going to co-create the remaining 5 weeks of this class. You are going to be as important as me in terms of designing this class. Well, the students were stunned. You mean we can participate in our own education in this way? I said, yes. And they came up with fabulous ideas, including a 30-day creativity challenge where they got rid of all the homework that I had assigned and focused on those areas of creativity which they always wanted to get to, but never had the time. So the results of this, the remaining 5 weeks, were as follows. One student did a documentary on Black Lives Matter that was as professional as I've ever seen on television or anywhere else. One PhD researcher from Beringer Ingelheim in Germany actually put the complex molecules that she was investigating into a form of original organic art that now sits on top of her fireplace. One student from China put together the most beautiful array of food that I've ever seen before. Now, recently, this morning, before this gathering, I had the last meeting of my class on leadership and building teams. And I did something very different with them. In my syllabus and in my introduction to the course, I kept writing, this course is about you. This is your course. It's about your development. It's about your path as a leader. But what did I do? I wrote a syllabus that was based on my background, my history, the books that I liked. And I said to myself, well, wait a minute, you are lying about what you put in your syllabus then. The course isn't about you. It's a course about me wanting to make you a different leader. And I said, this is wrong. So Partha, I'm going to get in trouble at Tufts. I know I am, because I said to my students at the second week, guess what? All the homework assignments for the remaining 5 weeks or 6 weeks of the course, forget about it. You are going to assign the homework yourself to you so it helps your development. So the class looked at me again like, he's crazy. He's the teacher. He's supposed to give us homework. I said, no, here's what we'll do. For any of you that are nervous, and there was these are engineers, so they like to see things very clear and structured. This was very unstructured. I said, for those of you that are nervous about this, go back to what I assigned, because I assigned some good books, some good TED Talks, some research papers, and so forth. So this morning before this gathering, I got feedback from the class. It was all about feedback. They said, Jerry, it took us a while to adapt to ourselves assigning our own homework. But guess what? Every TED Talk that I looked at, every conference that I read, every research paper that I read had to do with my next step is becoming a leader in engineering rather than a manager in engineering. And there's a significant difference. They themselves created their own career path. So I want to end by saying what they did reflected a recent research finding by the Center for Creative Leadership, where I used to work. And here's what they said. The CCL, where I used to work for 5 years, the Center for Creative Leadership said that the world has become so complex that the days are gone when you can go to your HR professional and ask, what do you recommend for the next step in my career? A book, a course. But guess what? The days are gone that these HR people cannot do this anymore, and the onus is on you. Now, the question then comes, how do you know what you don't know? And that's where we as educators come in. We cannot dictate, but we can suggest. And we have such a wealth of information. You know, I listened to Partha quoting all the things that he's learned from IBM, MIT. He's lying through his teeth, but it's a lovely story anyway. But it's true. That's our role. Our role is not to dictate. Our role is to give a lot of this responsibility for the education to our students again, and not be in essence little dictators. You know, as if what I write in my syllabus is gold. So again, I've had a blast as an educator. If Tufts chooses to fire me, Partha, so we'll still be friends. If Harvard decides to fire me, we'll still be friends. But I'm taking some bold steps.
Thank you, Jared. Thank you. I think you have a role in Boston Pledged, and Tufts will be delighted not to fire you, but to learn from you how to instill. You know, I would like to invite Dr. KL Chopra, Madhu, with your permission.
Yeah, please go ahead. Please.
Because I know I had the privilege to meet him when I visited IIT. When Madhu, remember, you took me around the campus?
Yes.
20 years ago. So I would like to hear his thoughts. Dr. Chopra, if you don't mind, Dr. KL Chopra, he was one of the most powerful directors of IIT Kharagpur. Right, Madhu? Am I right on saying that?
I think he was the most successful director of the IITs. That is how I'll put it. I would not use the word powerful, but I should say the most successful directors of IIT.
Okay.
And he brought a significant change in IIT Kharagpur.
Okay, Professor Chopra, I hope you remember me. I was in your office about 20 years ago. Your mic is on. You have to unmute.
You unmute. Professor Chopra, you have to unmute. Professor Chopra, you have to unmute.
You're muted.
You're muted.
Okay.
Okay, now you're.
Yeah. You
Start from. Yeah.
Joint meet number one, so I'm sorry. I have been busy with 2 webinars this morning. Okay, too much. No, I think whatever you're saying, I enjoyed listening to that. I think there's no two views about it. Unless you ask, you shall not get anything. In my taking classes, for example, in my younger days, I would not let the class go. I would say, unless you ask me 5 questions, I'll not let you go. I mean, that's the only way to understand yourself. Understand? Is it okay? Are you listening? Is it voice?
Yeah. Please go ahead.
Okay. So I think this is all I've gathered here. That this only asking, you will know what you want. As a matter of fact, they are connected to them. Otherwise, it's a futile exercise of teaching for them. Even teaching is futile if they don't ask you questions. So my practice used to be in our class. Last 10 minutes, I said, I'm not leaving you. I'm not going. You are not going anywhere unless you ask questions. And I will point out to students and say, why don't you ask the question? I think this is a serious problem in education, particularly. That education, at least in our country, and I suspect in many countries, is more like feeding you with information so that you can gargle it out when the exam is there. And I think this is one of the serious problems throughout the world today, okay? That education does not mean to all the formulae and all the things you have to know. As Einstein said very nicely, he said that I don't know much mathematics. Incidentally, his relativity is based on a lot of mathematics. General theory of relativity is based on a lot of mathematics. So he was asked, where do you learn all this? He said, I don't know mathematics. Incidentally, he was an engineer. In fact, he has a patent in the early days. He used to work in the workshop of his father. But of course, in theory of relativity, he became a very powerful theoretician. But he said, I know where I can get the mathematics that I need. I know the people from whom when I ask, I'll get the mathematics. So I think it's very simple. He says, there's no need that you have to learn yourself everything. If you ask something, you will learn, and that learning process will be much more fertile, much more useful. And I think this is the basis of whatever argument discussion you are having. So all I say is that teaching, particularly in teaching, asking question is much more important than teaching itself. And those teachers who don't let them ask the questions here, they are not giving anything to anybody, and it's a wastage of time of both sides. Thank you very much. That's all I'll say.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Chopra. Let me share with you one incident about Professor K.L. Chopra. I invited him to deliver a talk in a university, and he addressed the students. After that, he sat down and said, "No, questions, please." There were no questions. After a few minutes, then Professor Chopra said, "You are all dumb. You are all useless students." Just telling, and then the questions started coming up. I remember that. So teachers really should know how to provoke the students to ask questions.
Dr. Chakravarti, I have to, I'm laughing loud because I did that one time too. I said, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to start at the end. Are there any questions? And everyone is afraid to ask the first question. So I'm going to ask, is there anyone who has the second and third and fourth questions? And it was met by extreme silence. And then finally a hand went up. And guess what? When they were done asking all the questions that they did, they had given me the outline of the speech that I had already prepared. And that's when you're going to learn the most, when you give the answers to their questions rather than you're making statements.
All right.
I would like to clarify a question of a student that I don't know, and I should say, I'm sorry to let you know I answered that. I would like to.
So now I have one picture to share that I had compiled, and luckily I'm now able to share my screen. So if I may take 40 seconds to just show that picture, I'll feel like winning the Nobel Prize.
Devendar, I have just one more question because we are also running out of time. So let me take these questions. With this, we'll complete the question and answer, and then you'll put share your screen. Will that be all right?
Sure.
Thank you,
Perfectly.
Devendar.
Thank you.
Okay. There is a question from Mr. K.S. Aluwalia. He writes, his question is now, leadership today needs to redefine courage in their spaces, which is the art of living dangerously where and why we do anything, it means everything in business, in life. Would any of the panelists like to expand this?
Yeah, let me begin.
Yes, right.
I would
redefine courage in their spaces.
Yeah, no, that's a very good question, because to me, leadership is courage and courage is leadership. So, as Jerry knows, and we are trying to do that at IIT Kharagpur, we are building a leadership academy, first of the kind anywhere in the world, where we are saying to cultivate that kind of leadership, we need to help, as Dr. Chopra was talking about, develop three kinds of eyes. One eye is pure power of intellect, which I think we do reasonably good job, but from the point of view of knowing the formulas, not from the point of view of asking difficult questions. The second eye, which we do a poor job, is power of intuition. That how do we develop the intuitive capability so that you could connect the dots which you cannot see, but you hypothesize. And third one is the power of interconnectedness. And that's where I would link with what Devendar was trying to say, the connecting the inner universe, you can call it the minus universe, with the plus universe, the outer universe. And that's where, again, I think the ancient Indian education system, which we saw develop in Taxila and Nalanda and many other places 2000 years ago, was very developed, but we have lost that. So the So I think these three I's have to be taught, not taught, but uncovered in each personality, right from the childhood days, but more so in the university education, so that people, when they leave the education system, go out in the workspace, they could cultivate and work with the three I's. So that will be my kind of quick response. And by the way, Dr. Chopra will be happy to know that the Leadership Academy that we are trying to build at IIT Kharagpur is focused to adopt this model, which, by the way, I tested, as Jerry knows, at MIT, and it was quite successful with people like Peter Senge and others. Jerry, any thoughts on that? I know you've done a lot.
Well, you started off by talking a little bit about systems thinking, and the mantra that I use in systems thinking all the time is structure influences behavior. Structure influences behavior. I believe the structure of many of our corporations today have created a structure that inhibits courage, that inhibits creativity. When I started my class at Harvard this summer on creativity and innovation, I cited a study where 85% of CEOs said we need more creativity in our companies to be competitive. But when asked, did they really get that kind of creativity, only 15% said yes. And my belief is that the difference between the yeses and the other almost 70% of no's was because they didn't look at the structure of their organizations, which prohibited people, young people, like the kinds we teach from 25 to 32 years old, from being courageous and being having courage. One example, when my small chemical company, and I say small, we were about $50 million, we were acquired by a $4 billion trading company. And they made the first corporate lie was, we want you to be just the way you were. So 3 months later, men in suits came into our offices and spoke to each one of us, and I was in the international division. And they said, Jerry, we like your numbers for this year, this fiscal year, but you can earn a bonus. And they showed me all the ways to make a bonus. If you do 10% better, you get a 15% bonus, and so on and so forth. They spoke to every member of our international team, 20 people. They told us how to get a bonus. Then he brought us all together. And this is true. And I thought this was the dumbest statement I've ever heard in my life. After telling us all how we could get our individual bonus, he says, I want you guys to be a team. Now, that was so ridiculous because I remember we were on an annual year. At the beginning of December, my best friend in the world, not only in the company, came and said, Jerry, I need your help on a problem. I said, I cannot give you my help because I'm 2 weeks away of getting my bonus. My wife wants a new addition to the kitchen. My car is dying. I need a new car. I want to make my bonus first. Now, had this person listened to you and the three I's, he might have said when he put us all together in a group, you know something, I've given you all your individual incentives. Now, I'm going to give you a group incentive. If, for example, China is doing poorly, and Jerry, you have China and you're not going to get your bonus, but Partha, you have India and the growth is going like this. So maybe if you do better in India than you project, and it'll compensate for Jerry's, and the group will get a bonus. But he wasn't thinking systemically. So in order to encourage creativity and courage in our students, we have to look at our own underlying structures. Are we, as teachers, dictators of the class? Are we open to allowing students to do their own homework? This is going to be a fight going forward. And I think those with more forward thinking are going to allow more of a student voice combined with our experience and wisdom to make a fabulous class.
Thank you.
May I, with the request, one small part I want to add. Dr. Partha Ghosh, sir.
Yes, sure.
Yeah, one small point. See, the courage is extremely nice, sir. Partha Ghosh, sir, has pointed out very nicely. It is a courage which is the main point in the character of a person, because he loves the truth. When you love the truth, the courage comes out. You don't bother about your own self, you would like to drive out of the comfort zone. You are not a street smart person. The street dogs, because they are on the street, they are smart. The lions are not street dogs, they roar. The difference between a lion and a street dog is the courage. When the lion knows to roar, it roars. It doesn't bother what other dogs are talking about me, what others are thinking about me. So the courage is the one that is the quest for truth. So we must encourage the courage. If we discourage the courage in the name of street smartness, then we will always encourage the people to live as status quo is. Those who disturb the status quo, those who dare to disturb the apple cart, they only become the owners of the cart. Thank you, sir.
Very good point. Very good.
Thank you very much. Is there anybody else who wants to speak? Professor Chopra?
I mean, Peter Willits is there. Peter, because one point Peter made in the last session, remember, Madhusudhan, he talked about the role of the mentor, helping the mentee move to the critical state. That was a very powerful point, the critical state. So Peter, if you are listening, I know you're there. If you may share some of your thoughts based on what you heard today. You're on mute.
Okay. I think UNESCO said it very nice, very simple word. Education, purpose of education is what? Learning to learn, learning to do, learning to work together, learning to live together. And this can only come if you ask questions intrinsically, not for passing examination or something. Unless you feel about whatever you learn, you feel about it, that you learn. What is it for? Why were you taught this? I think that's basically what it is. And this is has to be sort of instilled right from the primary school onwards. The student should be asking questions. That should be a part of your lecture or teacher teaching. That 15 minutes are left only for questions, and the questions should be relevant, and the student should be made bold enough to raise those questions. I think that's a fundamental change that we need to do, particularly in our country. Well, I mean, I've taught in Canada, I've taught in USA, I've taught in Cornell. I tell you what, the students in Cornell will not let me go. They meet me in a shopping center and say, Prof, what about this question? I will shop. I mean, we are shopping now, and of course, Cornell is a very small city. And they raise questions like they say you didn't answer that. He told me. I felt pretty bad. So next time I said, okay, I think that is something about the American system. I must say that at least in good universities like Cornell or MIT, I've been around. The good students really learn to ask questions, and it is not the grades and all. They come out of this whole thing. I think this is something in our system. We need to create this thing. In fact, every teacher must reserve 10 minutes of this time only for raising questions. This is all I have to say. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay. I think before I hand over, close the question and answer session and hand over the mic to Ing. Let us allow Devendar to make the presentation he wanted to make. Is that all right, Partha?
Yeah, sure. 40 seconds as he claimed, but make sure it's 40 seconds.
Partha. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I hope you all are able to see the screen.
Yes.
Wonderful. Okay. So I was talking about questions, how we can treat questions as tools to mind the mind space. And as I was speaking about the minus infinity and the plus infinity, in between where the life exists, so now if I have to talk about the minus infinity, which is the universe within, where if a question is dropped, it invokes or activates the process which mines the mind space. From the example of Dr. Brightman, when he was talking about how the students responded, I could relate that all the students answered from the external appearance of the boss and the answer that was given. At that juncture, the another dimension that Dr. Brightman added was to think from the inner universe, the another dimensions that could be there, the positivity. And that could only come if we are looking inward for the solutions and not just outward. And when we are mining the inner universe or the minus infinity, the mobilization of thoughts that's happening by unleashing the intuitive power using the limbic systems, which is the intrinsic part of the central nervous system, which takes care of emotions and memory, we come across all the incidents of the past which help us, which feed us with the data, which is then processed to understand the behavior, the properties, the nature and relationships of various entities, and gives us the power to understand people better, understand matter better. The point that I'm trying to raise here is every action of ours in the external world gets influenced by the happenings happening in the internal world. And when we talk about the courage, so I think at this time we need courage from the intellectual diaspora of the world to question and to step forward and raise the consciousness of the generation to come, which will actually lead the human race forward in a more conscious way. And the Academy of Leadership that is coming up in IIT Kharagpur, as Dr. Ghosh was telling, is trying to build the leaders of tomorrow who will be confident problem solvers. So for that, we need to bridge the gap between the inner universe and the external universe. So that is where inventions, discoveries, and solutions would come from. And what I'd say that this is the audacity to measure the two extremes. So thank you very much for allowing me to share the presentation that I had made. Thank you.
Yeah. Nice job.
Can you disconnect Devendar?
Sure.
Thank you, Devendar, for sharing your thoughts, and you could show us the slides. We did not get any other question, but I know there will be many more questions that come up. It's one of the most important topics that we have discussed today. And Partho, shall we close and hand over the mic to Ying?
Yes, please.
Or you want? Okay.
Yeah, Ying, and maybe Ying, you could.
Yeah, I can quickly close in 40 seconds. Well, thank you again to all the distinguished speakers, panelists. I feel very touched by the discussion today. As a young member, relatively young member of the consulting profession, I think asking the right question is perhaps 80%, if not 90% of what we do on a daily basis. So developing the curiosity, the courage, the systems thinking to do that is indeed what we all need to aspire to do. But too often, I personally feel that, you know, these things get compromised, freedom gets restricted, we self-censor as we sort of balance the desire to please our clients versus the commitment to search for the truth. So you have all given me a lot to think about. Thank you again. I hope to see you and our audience again in 2 weeks' time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks
Thank
to all
you.
of you. Thank
Thank
you.
you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll continue the journey. This is just the beginning.
Yeah, yeah.
Indeed.
Thank you, Dr.
Thank you.
Chopra.
Thank you, Ghosh
Thank
sir.
you, Professor Chopra.
Ghosh
Yeah,
sir,
thank you.
Thank you. Thank you,
Thank you.
Ramesh.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you
Ramesh,
very much.
thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Chopra. Thank you,
Thank-
Devendar.
Thank
Thank
you,
you,
Jerry.
Jerry.
Yeah.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye-bye.